everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between September 14th and September 20th. First up, I read Black Water by Mchale, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt to read a book with elemental magic or an elemental word in the title or series title for Magical Readathon. This is the 5th book in the Pendragon series. In this series, we're following Bobby Pendragon, whose Uncle Press shows up one day and asks for help. Bobby easily agrees but isn't expecting to be whisked off to another world. From here, we see his adventures in these new worlds he comes across as he battles the evil Saint Dane, who wants to destroy not just those worlds, but the world Bobby comes from as well. So this was a reread for me, and this was another one of my favorite books in the series. This book is very different to the first 4 books in the series, but I can't really tell you why because of spoilers. But I like the fact that this book kind of turns everything on a head for Bobby in ways that he wasn't expecting. And it is interesting to see how he deals with this new twist that he has been thrown and how much he struggles with that. It is also interesting to see what is happening back on Bobby's world, because in this universe, he sends journals back to 2 of his friends at home. And basically, we hear Bobby's story via the journals he is sending back home. So it is interesting when we're back in his home world to see what is going on in his home world with his friends and how things are playing out there and how Bobby's journey has affected them as well. I think we have almost reached the point where I don't remember anything. Like, I know I've read book 6 before, but I think after that, if I've read them, none of the details stuck. So it is going to be interesting to see what happens once I get to those books, because I'm only sort of certain that I've read book 6. Though I can tell you that I don't remember too many details from book 6, so it's going to be interesting to see how many of the pieces of what happens in book 6 I managed to put together based on whether anything in that book jogged my memory. I'm still really enjoying my reread of the series, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with Bobby and Co. next. Next up, I read The Wizards of Once by Christina Cowell, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This book fulfilled the fantasy prompt for both Phase 10 Chooses My TBR and the Fall Into Reading Challenge. In this book, we're following a wizard named Czar and a warrior named Wish. Czar should have come into his magic by now, and since he hasn't, he decides he's going to capture a witch and steal hers, so he sets off into the forbidden Badwoods. But instead of capturing a witch, he ends up capturing Wish. Despite their differences, the 2 of them must work together, as something dangerous that has been sleeping for 100 years is starting to stir. So I listened to the audiobook of this, and it is absolutely fantastic. Like, I highly recommend you listen to the audiobook if you can, because the voice actor does just such a brilliant job at bringing this story to life, and I am sad that I don't have access to the audiobook for book 2, as I really cannot wait to continue on with the series, and I wish I could do it via audiobook. On the other hand, I will get to see the illustrations, because I did not physically read while I was listening to the audiobook, so at least when I read book 2, I will have access to the illustrations, which I didn't have while reading this book. I loved getting to see this world that Czar and Wish inhabited and getting to see how different they are, because they come from 2 completely different backgrounds. And the things they know about each other aren't exactly true, as their people have created a lot of myths about their people in the years before Czar and Wish were born. I think the relationships both of them have with their respective parent is interesting, as neither one of them has the best relationship with their respective parent, because we only hear about Czar's dad and Wish's mom, so I don't know where their other parents are, and I don't remember if their other parents were mentioned, but only Czar's dad and Wish's mom have a major role in the story. I'm very curious to see what is going to happen next with these 2 and how they navigate their societies and the events that happened in this book, and I am really looking forward to picking up book 2, even though I'm bummed that I won't be able to get to listen to the audiobook. Next up, I read Goldilocks, Wanted Dead or Alive by Chris Culfer, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book fulfills the prompt, read a book with a map in it, for both Phase 10 Chooses My TBR and the Magical Readathon. So this is a companion graphic novel to Chris Culfer's The Land of Stories series. And the events in this book show us what happens with Goldilocks way before the events in The Land of Stories. I really enjoyed getting to see Goldilocks' backstory and finding out more about how she became the character we meet in the Land of Stories series. It was also really interesting to see some of the other characters that we knew from the Land of Stories series and get to see different sides of them in this book. Some of which were very surprising. There were a few characters in here that, based on my opinions of them from the Land of Stories, acted in ways I was not expecting in this book. I think this is a really good companion novel, and I think it is the first in a series, so I think we're going to be getting more graphic novels set in this world from Chris Culfer, and I'm really excited about that because I love graphic novels, and I love this series and this world, and I can't wait to read whatever else Chris Culfer comes up with. Next up, I'm going to group these two together as they're part of the same series, and that is The Whole Cat and Caboodle, which I gave 4 stars, and Buy a Whisker, which I gave 3.5 stars by Sophie Ryan. In this series, we're following Sarah, who owns a secondhand shop, and she also has a furry cat companion named Elvis that she rescued when he was a stray and has kind of given him a second chance as well. In The Whole Cat and Caboodle, Sarah's friend Maddie is found with a dead body in her garden and becomes the #1 suspect. So with the help of her friends and, of course, her adorable cat Elvis, Maddie sets out to clear her name. I really enjoyed the start to the series. I liked the way Sophie Ryan set up this world and introduced us to Sarah and her friends and set up how Sarah would be going about helping to solve this murder. I liked getting to see the dynamics at play with the local law enforcement, as this is a town where Sarah visited, I believe, in the summer when she was younger, because this is where her grandmother lives. And now as an adult, she lives there. So in the summer, she would visit her grandmother. So the local law enforcement is actually kids that Sarah used to visit in the summer, and it is interesting to see how that dynamic plays into the overall story. I like how this mystery kind of came together and how Sarah had to work to figure out who was setting Maddie up, because she was pretty sure that Maddie was set up, and I just thought it was a really good start to the series. In Buy a Whisker, the waterfront in Sarah's town is hoping to be developed, and most of the town, including Sarah, is for it. However, there is one holdout, and that is Lily, who owns the bakery. When Lily is found murdered in her bakery, it seems the only obstacle to the waterfront development has been eliminated. Once again, Sarah and her cat Elvis end up looking into the murder, and Sarah soon learns that there may be more to this mystery than just the plan to develop the waterfront. I didn't enjoy this mystery as much as I did the first one, and I think it's because we barely knew Lily, so we felt no connection to Lily, whereas in the first one, even though we were just meeting Maddie, they really established the relationship Maddie had with Sarah, and we got to see that bond develop, so it made us care more about Maddie and her story. In this one, Lily is just some random that got murdered. And yes, Sarah knew her, but we never really felt that connection to Sarah. And I felt like the connection to Lily was never developed in a way that made me care as much about her story. I still thought it was a pretty decent cozy mystery, and I'm definitely planning to read more of this series in the future. Next up, I read A Quiet Life in the Country by T.E. Kenzi, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt: read a book that has green on the cover for Phase 10 chooses my TBR, read a thriller or mystery book for the Magical Readathon, and read a mystery book for the Fall Into Reading Challenge. So in this book, we're following Lady Hardcastle and her maid Flo. It's 1908, and the women have a secret past, but are just looking to settle down with a quiet life in the country. But all too soon, a body shows up, and it seems like the police are following the wrong track. Lady Hardcastle starts to ask questions, and seems to know more about investigating crimes than you would expect from someone of her station. Soon, Lady Hardcastle and Flo discover that this village isn't as simple as it seems, that there is a plethora of suspects, and the peace and quiet they were hoping for is nowhere to be found. So this book took me a little bit to get into. It started off a bit slow, but once it got going, I really enjoyed it. I loved getting to see Lady Hardcastle and Flo kind of reveal that there is more to them than meets the eye, as you wouldn't expect somebody who is a lady, which has such meaning to it back in the early 1900s to be somebody who would investigate murders, but she definitely knows what she's doing. It is also interesting to see that Flo and Lady Hardcastle's relationship is not one of like boss and employee. There's definitely a friendship there, and that kind of supersedes the boss-employee relationship, and it is interesting to see how that plays into the way they go about solving the murder. I really liked the setting of this, and I liked how we got to meet a lot of the different characters and see how their relationships with Lady Hardcastle and Flo developed, especially when you see Flo interacting with lots of different staff members, like basically the help of some of these higher tier families that Lady Hardcastle is visiting, and how she uses her ability to interact with them to help investigate the crime. I think this was a decent start to this series, and I definitely plan to continue on with the series and see what kind of crimes Lady Hardcastle and Flo investigate next. Next up, I read The Deep and Dark Blue by Nikki Smith, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This fulfilled the prompt for Buzzwordathon, which was the word dark, the graphic novel prompt for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, and LGBTQ+ rep for Bookopolython. After a political coup ends up taking over their house, Grayson and Hawk end up on the run and end up posing as girls at the Communion of Blue, which is a magical order of women who have the ability to weave the threads of reality. As they learn more about the Communion, they start to plan a way to take back their house and get revenge for their family. Hawk cannot wait to return to his life, while Grace is less certain. She's finally found a home here with the Communion of Blue, and she doesn't want to leave, and is worried that by going back to avenge her family and regain her house, she will lose this home she has made for herself that allows her to be who she truly is, a girl. So I thought this was an interesting take on the story of a character showing that they are trans, as when we first meet them, we have no idea that Grace is a girl. And I'm not even sure Grace knows herself until she is given the option to pretend to be a girl. I think Grace knows she's different than Hawk, but I don't think she realizes the extent to which she is different. And I like getting to see that journey of self-discovery and the differences between the way Grace fits in at the Communion and the way Hawk doesn't. I think that is a really good way of illustrating the differences between the two characters and their two journeys. I did find this to be a bit slow at times. It wasn't a book that like super sucked me in, and that is why it gets a lower rating, but I thought the art style was interesting, and I definitely enjoyed getting to see Grace's journey of self-discovery and getting to see, like I said, the differences between Hawk and Grace and how that kind of helped influence the story. I would definitely be willing to check out more by Nikki Smith in the future, as I enjoyed this book. And maybe it wasn't my favorite, but I still did enjoy it. Next up, I read Amelia Fang and the Rainbow Rangers, and as this is a 5-star prediction, you will have to wait for my wrap-up to find out what I thought of it. This book covered the prompt 5-star prediction for the Magical Readathon, monsters for Bookopolython, and to read a book in a series that is 5 books or longer for series September. In this series, we're following Amelia Fang, who is a vampire and goes on adventures with her friends and her pet pumpkin Squashy. It is a very cute early middle grade series, and I have loved the first 3 books in this series, and I will at least tell you that I definitely enjoyed this book. This wasn't like a 2-star. This was another great entry in the Amelia Fang series, but you will have to wait for my 5-star prediction wrap up to see if it got the full 5 stars. Next up, I'm going to group these two together as they're part of the same series. First is Murder in the Secret Garden, which I gave 3.5 stars and fulfilled the prompt for Leaves on the Cover for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, and Murder in the Lock Library, which I gave 4.25 stars to, both by Ellery Adams. So this series follows Jane, who along with her great aunt and uncle run a resort that caters to book lovers. In Murder in the Secret Garden, Jane is hosting a group of medieval herbalists, and when one of them winds up dead, she must figure out whether one of the others in the group used their knowledge of plants to commit murder. So far, this has been my least favorite book in the series. I wasn't as into the medieval herbalist as I was into the mystery theme of the first book or the romance book lovers of the second. and obviously based on my reading as I was into book 4. I still really enjoyed this mystery, and I like Jane and her family and the way she goes about solving these mysteries. This one definitely had some twists I wasn't expecting, but like I said, it just didn't draw me in the way some of the others did. In Murder in the Lock Library, the resort is adding a spa to its grounds. And as the foundation is being dug, a bunch of bones along with a unknown book are dug up. The resort is currently hosting a rare book conference, and the guests are happy to help Jane try to identify the book that was found with the bones. When one of these guests turns up dead, Jane must find out who killed her guest and if it in any way connects to the bones and or the book that was found. So this one I found far more interesting than the Secret Garden. I really loved this idea that there was this old skeleton that was dug up with this mysterious book, and Jane had to get to the bottom of whether this book and these bones somehow connected to the death that happened in current day, and it was very interesting seeing her go about doing that. It is also interesting when she has this book and she doesn't know who she can trust when it comes to the guests, but they are the ones that have knowledge on old and rare books, so she has to balance needing their help with also not trusting them. The end of this book really surprised me, and I was not expecting some of the twists and turns that happen, and I definitely cannot wait to pick up book 5 and find out what happens next, as there's definitely some cliffhangers that are left at the end of this book. Next up, I read The Nature of Fragile Things by Susan Meisner, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt of historical fiction for both Phase 10 Chooses My TBR and the Fall Into Reading Challenge. This book is set around the events of the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. We're following Sophie, who is a young immigrant who is barely surviving in New York, when she sees an ad for a mail-order bride from Martin, a widower who has a young daughter. Desperate to escape the awful living conditions she finds herself in, she answers the ad and is excited when Martin chooses her, and so sets off to San Francisco. She soon develops an affection for her new stepdaughter Kat, despite the fact that Kat barely speaks. Between that and her new husband's odd behavior, Sophie can tell something isn't quite right. Then, one day, a pregnant woman shows up on her doorstep, and everything for Kat changes, as she is now tied to this woman and another woman who is hundreds of miles away. All of this happens on the eve of the earthquake that is going to make things much harder for everyone involved. So I enjoyed getting to learn about the earthquake in San Francisco in 1906. I thought that was quite an interesting twist in how it played into the larger story with Sophie, her husband, Kat, and this random pregnant woman that shows up and kind of makes some things fall into place for Sophie. It is interesting to get to see the aftermath of the earthquake, because that earthquake changes a lot of things for all of the characters involved, and it is interesting to see how things play out after that, and to wonder how different things would have been had that not happened. It is also interesting getting to see just like the devastation that this earthquake caused and seeing how that was handled back then, and really just how devastating it was to people back in the early 1900s to have an earthquake of this magnitude happen, especially when I don't think they would have had to deal with something on that scale at that point in time. I loved Sophie's relationship with Kat and seeing how that relationship grew from the day they met to the end of the story, and I really enjoyed how much of an influence that had on the story as a whole and the choices that Sophie made, because the Sophie we met in the beginning of the book might not have made the choices that she ended up making, but her relationship with Kat definitely changed her, and it was interesting to see that change in that character. I definitely like the way this book flowed and can see myself reading more from Susan Meisner in the future. And lastly, I read The Unspeakable Unknown by Elliot Sappingfield, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book covers the prompt book in a series I most recently started for Series September, and sci-fi for the Fall Into Reading Challenge. This is the second book in the Nicola Cross series. In the first book, we're following Nicola, who doesn't really fit in at school and comes home one day to find out that her dad has been kidnapped by what look to be extraterrestrials. She is then whisked off to a new school where she is safe from these extraterrestrials, as they also want to get their hands on her. Her new classmates aren't entirely human, so she has to figure out how to fit in at this new school while also worrying about her dad. This book, we see Nicola back at the school, and we're getting to see what is happening after the events of the first book. I'm still really enjoying this series. I definitely am excited to have found a new middle grade sci-fi series to get into. I like getting to see Nicola's relationships with her classmates, especially, like I said, they aren't all human. They're very different, and it is interesting seeing her try to adapt to their peculiarities that she's not used to dealing with. Like, while she didn't fit in her human school, she definitely understood how things worked there. So it is interesting to see her navigate this new school, and it is interesting to see her also continue to worry about her dad and have to try to figure out how to help him, if at all possible, while also keeping herself safe. I'm just really, really enjoying this series, and if you're looking for a middle grade sci-fi series to pick up, I highly recommend you check this out. So these are some of the books I've read recently. Have you read any of these books? If so, let me know what you thought of them in the comment section below. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a banana emoji, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!